On this episode, we're in conversation with Nicholas Payton, and we had so much fun that we went over time. So we decided to break it down into two parts. We hope you enjoy. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the conversation piece. I am your host, Kelly. Today, we are in conversation with the multi-talented, Grammy Award-winning, and my bestie, Nicholas Payton. NP, as I call him, has done so many great things in the music industry, and he has created his own lane in the genre of what is called jazz. And we will discuss that term later. With all of the titles and accolades, Nicholas is a light being from New Orleans who thrives on living life through his music. My friend, welcome to the conversation piece. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here with us. How are you?
A pleasure, Kelly. How are you?
I am wonderful.
Great.
When I thought about who I wanted to be on the show, I knew I had to have you on not only because of your music and your musical genius, but because of how you think and your I don't give a what attitude. You are a child prodigy that was born into a musical family, your father being Walter Payton. He was a bassist, and your mother, Maria Payton, is a vocalist and pianist. So, as a result of your familiar tutelage, the foundation and blueprint was already established for you. However, you made the decision to continue this musical legacy that you were born into. Was there ever a time when you thought of wanting to do anything other than music?
Sure. When I was about right before I made the conscious decision to pursue music as a life path career, I wanted to be a chemist. I was really into chemistry and setting stuff on fire and stuff like that. So
Setting
I was
stuff
I
on.
was into Mr. Wizard. Remember that show? And that got me into it. Um, and my father bought me a chemistry set, and I just loved experimenting with elements and watching their effect on each other. But music is a different alchemy and chemistry of sorts. So I found that with notes and chords and scales,
Mhm.
rhythms and things like that. So
Okay.
yeah,
So while you were considered a musical prodigy before the first grade, okay, do you remember what you felt playing your first instrument?
I don't recall my first musical memory
Mhm.
or not really playing music like it because I had two musical parents, and I grew up in New Orleans. It was just a part of the fabric of my everyday life. I don't know life without music, you know.
Mm.
Um, but my dad used to like to tell this story. Apparently, when I was a baby, maybe not even walking yet, um, they were having a rehearsal at the house, and there was like a string quartet my dad wrote some music for, and they were trying to get this chord off of the record, and he kept listening to it and he couldn't figure out what the chord was. And my dad says I crawled over to my little toy piano and put my hand down, and everybody was like, that's it, that's the chord.
Oh, wow.
So I just always had an ear for music, before I even understood the complexities of what all was involved
Hmm.
with pursuing that type of path. It, I could always hear, my ears were always great, and they've led me to this day, you know.
So by the age of 10, you were performing professionally, and New Orleans is the birth city of what people call, again, jazz. How was it decided that you would play professionally?
My first experience on a gig, mind you, I'd been going to gigs with my dad, since the womb. So I grew up around the cats and gigs and stuff like that. So I was no stranger to that. But when I was 9 years old, my dad, he had a gig. This is like a Mardi Gras parade or something. He was like, grab your horn. And I was like, okay. So I didn't know what we would be doing, and I sat in with his band the whole time. He was in a brass band, and we marched all around the city. And at the end of the parade, all the guys like chipped in $1 and paid me a little salary, and it was like $10, which what this was 1982. That was a lot of money for a kid, especially. And I was like, wow, I just had the time of my life, and I made some money,
Right.
and that planted the seed for sure. Like, and then I think through that experience, a lot of cats started hearing that, Walter's son, he plays music or whatever, and people started calling me for gigs and stuff like that. And I started doing some things, and it was cool. And I lived at this time, we had moved from uptown New Orleans, where I was born, to the Treme area. And we lived right across the street from the park, Armstrong Park, which is, interestingly enough, literally right across the street from Congo Square. So I grew up across the street from where all of this started, more or less. And a guy who had a brass band in my neighborhood, this young cat at the time, James Andrews. For those who may not be familiar, he's a trumpeter from New Orleans, and he's also the eldest brother of Trombone Shorty. But Trombone Shorty wasn't born yet. In fact, I remember when Trombone Shorty was born at the time I was in this band. So he had heard that I played, and he came to my house one day, and I remember being in the back, and I was wondering who my dad was talking to, and he was saying who he was, and he asked my father, can your son play with us, in our little youth brass band? And my dad was like, yeah, it's cool. He can play with y'all. And I was like, ain't nobody gonna ask me, do I want to even do this or whatever? So it was almost kind of like an arranged marriage situation where my father thrust me into this situation. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm playing with y'all. And we started doing gigs around town and stuff. So for those who don't know, the brass band culture in New Orleans is really big. And we did everything from playing on the street for tips, which doesn't sound that lucrative, but we made quite a bit of money back then doing that. Playing Mardi Gras parades, second lines, funerals. There's a big thing with funeral processions and music in New Orleans. Birthday parties, bar mitzvahs, wherever you can fit a band in any social type of context. That's what kind of gigs we did. On up through like festivals, and I went on my first cruise in that band, and that's where I met a lot of heavyweights, which we can get into later. But that really was the beginning of me actually being in a band and working a lot, and then being around peers who played the music, because up until then, a lot of the cats I was around were much older than me. So this was the first situation I was in with people my age who were serious about being a professional in music. But even that situation wasn't enough to really light the fire in terms of me wanting to do it as a career. So because of this gig, and because I was playing a lot more, for the first time, I was really serious about checking this music out. And my father had a vast record collection. So one day I went through his stash of records, because I had my own records at the time, and I was listening to Michael Jackson and hip hop and all that stuff. I wasn't really into what my father listened to too much, just peripherally when I would listen to what they would play. And my mom would listen to like Anita Baker and stuff like that. So I was into that for sure. Al Jarreau, a lot of the current R&B stuff my mom listened to, as well as operatic stuff, and vocalists like Sarah Vaughan and Carmen McRae. So I grew up hearing a lot of things, but I was still into stuff that people my age were listening to. So, but this was the first time me, being like, let me check out this stuff my father listens to, because I wasn't into jazz. I didn't like that stuff. So I was going through the records, and I found an album by Miles Davis. I was like, okay, he plays trumpet. Let me check this out. And I looked at it. It was called Four and More. So I put it on. Side 2 actually has the title track 4. So I put it on side 2 first. And it was like I was hearing music for the first time. and from the intro, Tony Williams plays this thing on the sock cymbal, and it was like before even Miles and them came in, I was like, this is what I want to do the rest of my life. And that was that. And I listened to that album like every day for like a year and tried to play every note on it. And that was the beginning of at 10 when I decided this is what I want to do the rest of my life. It was very clear. And I never wavered since.
Just from that album.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna I was gonna wait until later to ask you about your Miles Davis admiration, but I mean we can go into that right now.
That's where it started
Mhm.
with that album. Yeah.
Okay, great. Now, you were educated by the patriarch of the Marsalis family, Mr. Elias Marsalis. How was that experience for you, and what age were you?
Well, Ellis.
Thank you, Ellis.
No problem. I met him when I was around 12 through Winton. I was actually taking a lesson with Winton at the time when I met him. I knew Ellis as a kid because my dad played with him a lot, but he had moved away to teach. And where did he teach at? I think Virginia Commonwealth he taught. So when I was coming of age, starting to play, I didn't really know Ellis at all. So I met Winton actually through, he called our house one day to speak to my dad, and I had just started listening to his music because before then I had heard the name Wynton
Mhm.
Marsalis, and I saw them as kids in the 70s when I would go to gigs with my dad, but I didn't really listen to his music very much as a kid. But when I became serious after that Miles Davis thing, then I just started listening to everybody.
Mhm.
So then I was really getting into Wynton. And this album he played with Art Blakey in particular called Keystone 3. That was in heavy rotation for me. And I was learning all the solos on that. So he called the house one day to speak to my dad. He was like, hello, man, speak to Walter, is Wynton Marsalis. And I about had a heart attack. I was like, oh my God. And my dad was talking to him, and I got the bright idea to start practicing in the background with hopes of getting his attention. And he asked my dad, who's that playing the trumpet? And my dad was like, oh, that's my son. He plays. He was like, okay, bring him on by the house. So I went over the next day and had a lesson with him or whatever. So Ellis, he just remembered me as a kid, but he didn't know I played.
Mhm.
He was like, this Walter's son, Nicholas, play for my dad so he can hear you. So Ellis was at the piano and we played a blues or something like that. And then Winton left the room to go take a phone call, and me and Ellis just sitting there, kind of awkward silence, like whatever. And then after a few moments, Ellis was like, yeah, my son seems to think a lot of you. I don't know what he sees in you personally. So I was like, wow. And I'm 12 years old, so I'm a bit crushed. And that kind of started years of like him basically kind of hazing me. He was very, very tough. I don't think I felt Ellis thought I could play until maybe I was about 30 years old.
Really?
Up until then, every time I see him, he would just be very, very harsh. But he would years later, actually after he passed away, I was talking to one of uh, his students who we went to college with. And he was like, "Oh, Ellis used to tell us all the time, y'all need to be checking out Nicholas. But to me,
Yeah.
he never made it seem like to me like he thought much of me.
Mhm.
So he came from that kind of hard, school of hard knocks, kind of
Mhm.
like don't
Mhm.
let them think you're great,
Right.
think they're great kind of thing. So yeah, he
Mhm.
he, he was pretty harsh.
Wow. What an experience though.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Now, growing up, did your parents foster that strong sense of, self confidence in you, or that you express today? Like, where did that come from?
Yep. I didn't see it as that at the time.
Mhm.
It's something that I grew into later on in life. But my parents always let me express myself, not in a disrespectful way,
Mm-hmm.
because I could be a little flip sometimes, but they understood that they were not raising a child, they were raising a man. And they allowed me to make a lot of my own decisions. When we go to a restaurant, they taught me how to read so I could read the menu and order what I wanted. They a lot of the battles and the things that I might have gotten into as a child, they watched from afar, but they let me figure my own stuff out. And at times it honestly felt maybe like I wasn't as protected as a lot of
Mm-hmm.
my peers. But as I grew older and now I see a lot of my peers still struggling with finding themselves or having a voice, I don't have that problem because I had to grow up really fast because my parents sort of had this kind of approach to like figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So I really appreciate and have grown to appreciate more as I gotten older that I got that stuff out of the way really early
Mm-hmm.
because I wouldn't be who I am today without that. So
Right.
even to the point of, a bit later, I'm going to jump ahead. When I was in my sophomore year of high school and I started gigging a lot, started going on the road with a lot of different people, I wanted to drop out of high school. And my mom had to sign the paperwork for me to do so because I was a minor still. So I brought the paperwork home and I was like, Mom, I don't want to finish high school. I already know what I want to do. I'm not learning anything.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, okay, and signed it and gave it back to me. I was prepared for like World War III. Like she didn't fight me on it at all. I was almost a bit disappointed. Like, wow, she don't care. Like I'm getting ready to drop out of school.
Right.
And I had thought about it over the summer. I was like, you know what? I'm in my last year. I got like one more year to go. Let me just knock this year out. I probably won't finish college. So over the summer, I had decided to complete high school. And then a couple years later, I asked my mom. I was like, Mom, why did you just sign that paperwork like that? Like she was like, I knew if I had fought you on it, you would have rebelled. I knew if I had let you make your own decision, you would think about it and finish anyway. That's
Mm-hmm.
forward parenting and knowing your child. So that's an example of the kind of parenting they did. They didn't rule with an iron fist. They let me make my own choices and oftentimes pay my own consequences as a result of those choices. But I do appreciate their freedom and letting me express myself from early on.
Absolutely. And that's a gift because I mean, I had a similar experience with my parents. I mean, I say this a lot where I was allowed to be, it was pretty much like you in the way of, you're going to learn the consequences. We're right here. However, and I think parents know what child they can do that with.
Yeah,
I think I always say this too. Like I came out probably fiercely independent.
yeah,
And then my father fostered that as well, where it was like, no, you need to be independent and really don't depend on anybody for anything, which kind of put me in sticky situations because we're not on an island. We do need people, but like you said, later in life, I understood that. But I think that's a gift. It's a gift.
absolutely. And to your point about parents knowing which child they can do that to, my younger brother completely coddled, completely different situation.
Mhm.
They didn't do that with him.
Mhm.
They let me be because they knew, like yourself, you couldn't tell me what to do anyway. And my mama always says, you can't tell Nicholas what to do. So that's what it
Yeah.
was. So
Now I do say when my mother did ask me to do something, it was done. But again, I wasn't out there being all those words and terms that they called girls back then. That wasn't me. Now, the only thing, like you said a little earlier, I did have a flip mouth. But other than that, yeah, I mean, I went the path that needed to go. And at 21, my dad was like, listen, you need to figure it out on your own, not what your mom and not what I want you to do. And it was almost like I heard the angels sing like like, oh. I've been doing all of this just to like please you. I can just do everything on my own for real, for real.
Mm,
So yeah, that's a gift, and I appreciate that.
absolutely.
So, Nicholas, we're gonna get into this term called jazz. When
Okay.
I was writing for I Rock Jazz, and you know what, let me give my guy a shout out. Let me take a pause on that. John Moultrie, who gave me the dream opportunity to write for I Rock Jazz, and it's actually the springboard to the conversation piece. I remember doing some interviews and my research and how a lot of the, let me use your term, older cats abhorred the word jazz. And it was actually like a negative term. And you being from New Orleans, what does jazz really mean?
Well, to me, historically, it's the appropriation of Black music
Mm,
has ties to minstrelsy. The first recorded jazz band was the original Dixieland Jazz Band,
okay.
uh, and that name itself is hella problematic. Original, first, they weren't the first. Dixieland, we know, has ties to slavery in
Mhm,
the Confederate South. Jazz used to be spelled JASS, which is said to be a contraction of jackass. And the leader from New Orleans is a guy named Nick LaRocca, who's a known racist and is the self-proclaimed Christopher Columbus of music. And when he said that, I don't know if he knew how badly that would age or aged well, depending on how you want to look at it.
mhm,
But basically, he considered himself discovering something that was already here and inventing something that Black people had already created. Uh, that first record they cut called Livery Stable Blues was minstrelsy, musical minstrelsy. They were making animal sounds and jungle sound, using these old tropes of, savage Africans in the jungle, stuff like that. Tiger Rag is another song he wrote, which has that same type of imagery of uncultured, uncivilized jungle bunnies. Um, so that's that piece of it. The movie that kind of ushered in what they call the jazz age, which was in the late 20s through the 30s, where jazz was really the popular pop music of its time. Dances from high school on up to nightclubs. That was the popular music of its time. And Louis Armstrong was the world's first pop star. He was Michael Jackson of his era. Mainly because his musical genius and gift coincided with a new advent in the phonograph, the record player, which allowed people all over the world to hear the same piece of music and be impacted by it in virtually real time. So, because of that advent, it allowed someone like a Louis Armstrong, who had this new voice, to be branded and to be basically a household name across the world. So much like what the music video did for Michael Jackson, that catapulted this kid with a look and a style and a way of dancing, he was fit for video. He was just primed for this new thing to take off, and he had the right team and the music for all of it to sort of have synergy and take place and set off. So the same thing happened with Louis Armstrong 60 years before it happened with Michael Jackson. Um, so with that, The Jazz Singer, which was a movie that really helped solidify jazz's place in the pop canon, uh, was an actor by the name of Al Jolson starred in the leading role. And the apex of the film, the centerpiece, is Al Jolson singing jazz and basically doing a song called Mammy in blackface. So that whole white glove, jazz hands thing comes from there. So its roots are in minstrelsy. Now, some people will argue that we've escaped that imagery. I feel like it's more coded. It still exists. And I don't think you can ever strip jazz of its minstrel roots. Now, what does minstrelsy look like in the 21st century? Black people not having ownership and authorship of their own music. We don't own the clubs. We don't own the festivals. We are basically workers. You know, essentially, as Michael Jackson and George Michael and Prince has said, when you don't control your artistic intellectual property, you're essentially a slave. And we're still slaves to this day in that sense, and not having ownership and authorship of our own IP. So that's what minstrelsy looks like now. Then you're just out there, for lack of a better term, you know, tap dancing. So
Yeah. Whew. You know, I had to take a couple deep breaths on that one. Like we had to exhale for.
yeah, stage the room.
So as a result, you came up with the hashtag BAM, BAM, Black American Music.
Mhm.
Like when did that come about, and how did that become an intentional part of who you are and your music and your expression?
Mhm. Good question. It was interesting how it came about because I had actually, well, I was blogging a lot at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't even like that terminology because I figured like the things I was writing wasn't blogging. I was writing essays more or less. But this was when blogging was really popping, and
Mm-hmm.
Twitter and all that stuff was really on fire, and think pieces were a thing. So I've been writing for years on the subject, but no one really paid attention to it either way. It would get some clicks, some views, but it nothing had really set off yet. And my uh, views against jazz, the one who basically opened my eyes to it was Gary Bartz. I was talking to him, what was this, about 2010?
Mm-hmm.
No, 2009. We were playing at the North Sea Jazz Festival, and I was backstage talking to Gary, and he was the first person I had ever in real life encountered who was using jazz as a pejorative. Like there was some corny white cats playing at the time, and
Mm-hmm.
he was like, "Yeah, they playing that jazz over there." And I was like, and a light bulb went off because I had been writing about the music and what the problems were in terms of Black people not, one, recognizing that it's their music, um, and the Black aesthetics of the music and elements like the blues and so forth, why they weren't as celebrated as some of the aspects of the music that were more tied to perhaps a European classical aesthetic. That these more Black folk elements were sort of being diminished in light of things that did not come from the culture, which spurred on the music. So I've been writing about that, but I hadn't put together yet jazz itself was actually the problem, and jazz was separating Black people from their music. So when he started saying that, it was like a light bulb went off, and it was like, oh, that is actually the problem. So that made me revise my whole outlook on it. And I had been writing about it for years, but nobody really, again, paid attention to it. And then one afternoon before a sound check, I was live tweeting in my hotel room, and the energy of what I was saying, and it was almost like it was coming through me. I didn't know why I was saying it or from whence it came. It just was coming through me, and I was just letting my fingers go where they wanted to go. And I could tell people were getting either very excited or very angry about what I was writing. I had struck a nerve. That much
Mm-hmm.
was very clear. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but I'm on to something. And so when I was finished with that stream, whenever the flow of whatever that was that passed through me was, I copied and pasted each tweet and put it in a WordPress document and called it on why jazz isn't cool anymore. This was 2011. And I posted it. And that was basically the genesis of what later became known as the BAM movement. But there wasn't even a BAM at that point. I hadn't yet come up with that acronym. When people, because of that piece, asked me, well, if it's not jazz, what would you call it? And then that's when Black American music came to me, and I put the hashtag, one, to just make it distinct from other BAMs, be it Emerald's BAM or BAM from the Homeboy Shopping Network from Inland. And also, to me, it was a Twitter thing because hashtags were a thing of Twitter at that time.
Right.
So that's where the whole hashtag BAM thing comes from.
Okay. Yeah, I like it. Of course, I like it, better than jazz now that I got that history. Not
Mm.
just from you, but like I said, when I was writing for Iraq Jazz and I don't remember if it was Gary Bart's I didn't interview him, but it was already a published interview and I had read it and that's where, like I said earlier, where it was like, no, this word it's a mark on our community. You know what I mean? So yeah.
It's a musical equivalent of the N word, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Miles did he even say something about it
Yeah.
too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Miles, Mingus, Coltrane, Ahmad Jamal. I mean, the list goes on and on. And the thing is, I was discovering this in real time while I was, so that post went viral. I mean, it went really, really crazy. I was learning as I went of how many people actually, I had jumped out on the ledge, like on the stance of like Gary Bartz, but then I had found out Duke Ellington and Sidney Bechet, all these people were saying the same thing, you know? So history has proven to show that to have been a good thing to have done, because at the time I was everything but blacklisted. Basically, they were trying to shut me down. I had promoters not want to give me gigs, all
Wow.
kinds of stuff behind it. Called me racist. People thought I hated white people. It was crazy. It was really nuts. Black people had a problem with it too, and I get it, because I too didn't know for years. I was very committed to jazz for a majority of my life, but it was interesting because I had gone back to my primal instinct as a kid. Remember when I was saying that I didn't want nothing to do with jazz
Right.
as a kid, even though I grew up around it. I didn't like jazz, so I didn't listen to my dad's albums. To come around to come full circle, to go around to understanding that initial feeling of not liking jazz was not unfounded. It was based in something. To now
Right.
not liking jazz now, and being one of the primary voices in our time of being outspoken against jazz.
Right. It's like you were the chosen one. Yeah.
Kind of.
I would say
I
so.
didn't choose. I didn't choose it. It chose me. I
Right.
just went for it.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of people took like I was trying to position myself or do this. Listen, that me taking that stance costed me more than it gave me,
Yeah.
because at that time, and Kel, when I put this, we're in the height of the Obama years. So
Mm-hmm.
everybody thought we were in a promised land. What are you griping about? Even black people, especially, were non-supportive. There was this idea and this myth around post-blackness. All these theories and things were floating around about how we have now reached the highest seat of the land and we have the spoils of everything we work towards. No sooner than that, then Black Lives Matter happens. And then people start to see like, oh, things are not as cool as we perhaps thought. They were just hidden and coded. So fast forward to 10 years later, post George Floyd and that whole summer of 2020, the BAM post being like 10 years. So whereas like maybe 90% of people that I could see were against me and 10% for, that percentage switched to 90% people, even if they didn't not disavow the terminology jazz, understood and support that, they understand that it's Black music. And most of these young cats, a lot of them, from what I see, they don't like the terminology either. And they understand the history or whatever. So I do, uh, that is something that I'm proud of, if I may say, for taking that stand, because it was not easy. And trust me, like, anybody thinking I was doing this for some kind of credit or shine, that's ridiculous. I went through years of hazing and isolation and people calling me crazy. Now I am crazy, but maybe not for that reason. But you know what I mean? Like, I was looked at as a pariah for the longest time. So that thing aged well, and people could really see, like, oh, America is an extremely racist place.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, you were definitely chosen. I mean, like you said, there was something that came through you, and I'm gonna actually mention that a little later. But yeah, it was. Yeah, you were chosen for that, and that was part of your experience, even the hazing and the blacklisting and all of that. To now, where it's like, oh yeah, like you just said, like, oh, our eyes are open now. We're awake. So yeah, you were the chosen one for that. So, I read something, and it's a quote that well, I'm actually going to share two, but the first one is something that I really love, and I'm actually going to entitle this Inner View. And it's quote, "The music means nothing without life." And I would like for you to expound further on this. And where were you in your life when you said or wrote this?
mm, that's a good question. When I think about that quote that passed through me, I think of a conversation I had with a mentor and a great musician, Earl Turpinton. Um, and we used to call him the African cowboy because he'd wear these beautiful dashikis and a cowboy hat. But he was a really uh, tapped in, channeled
Mm,
artist. And he and this other guy, Fred Kemp, they were colleagues with my dad, and Earl lived around the corner from us. Those were the earliest jam sessions that I had. They would come over by the house and play tunes with my dad. And I was like 11, 12. And
mhm,
I had a little bit more under my fingers than I did at 10 years old. I knew some tunes now I could play. They would let me play with them. And it's interesting to me that I could ever perhaps expound on something that would touch an elder like the African cowboy who was already so knowledgeable and tapped in. But we were talking about something one time, and I said, Earl, life is bigger than music. And a couple years later, he was like, man, that really messed me up. He didn't use the word messed, but he was like, my whole life has been based around music. I never thought of myself as something bigger than the
mm,
music.
mhm. Wow.
So,
Wow.
but yeah, the music has to come from somewhere. The music is just a language, and we are
Mhm.
conduits.
Yes.
Where that comes from is something else. It's just like what I was telling you, and I know you get this because you live in that space as well. When things come through us,
Mhm.
all our conditioning and our training and our discipline, we condition our bodies to be receptors for that. And certain energies won't even come through you if you haven't done that work, right?
Yes, sir.
So
Yes, sir.
I, and when I look at my life in general, and people for years, and I felt strange about it early on for several reasons. But when I hit the scene and started getting a lot of press early on, people called me the second coming of Louis Armstrong. And those are some absolutely heavy shoes to fill. But because he's looked at as the progenitor of all of this. He's looked at as the godfather of Black American music, basically. He started it. There were people before him, but he revolutionized it in such a way to make it, dare I say, with all due respect to his predecessors, he made things that came before him in some way kind of obsolete. He's like the starting point. He's ground zero. He took all of that information and put it in such a way that you can't not go through him.
Mm-hmm.
All roads start with him. So one, that's a heavy thing to say, like for me, I'm not worthy, but at the same time too, I did feel something there with him, and as I said earlier, growing up in that park right across the street when we moved there. And I remember, at 8 years old, when we moved from the neighborhood we were, which was very, on Louisiana Parkway we lived. It looks like that subdivision on Back to the Future,
Okay.
like where they have the little stone before you walk down the way, and the trees sort of do this over the street or whatever. It's like, and it's a very un-New Orleans spot in the middle of New Orleans. It's like this oasis. All the homes are stucco. It was a very middle class, black middle class, safe environment to grow up in. I could go on the street and play, no problems, whatever. When we moved to the Treme, this was the hood. So, we got robbed within months of moving there. Our house did, not us personally, but when we were on a trip, our place got vandalized. And that was the first encounter I had with, like, if you've ever had your home ravaged, like, you feel violated. Like, you look at life differently when something like that happens to you. So that was, my innocence in a sense was broken. But when I look back again on us moving there at that time of my life, right before I became serious about playing, I needed to be in the heart of it. I needed to be right there, connected to it, right across the street from Armstrong Park, right across the street from Congo Square, and right in that neighborhood for James Andrews, Lil James, Trombone Shorty's eldest brother, to scoop me up like a big bro and say, come with us and get this tradition from the streets. It was time for me to be there,
That's what I would call divine alignment. Divine alignment, absolutely. So, Nicholas, you are known for pushing the envelope, as we just discussed. And your thought processes are, well, against the grain, like myself. Were you always this way, or was it something that developed throughout your life's experiences?
I was always this way.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm as outspoken as I am, I'm very shy.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people who are around me who think they know me, they're sometimes taken aback, because if I don't have anything to say, or if I'm not very comfortable, I won't speak, so I'm very quiet. So sometimes people think like it's, oh, you're on the internet, you whatever. Like if you know me, if you're one of my homies, like this is just really how I am.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I've always pretty much been the same way. As I've gotten older, I've gotten more comfortable with being more outspoken and put my shyness on the back burner for those social and political issues that I feel that are important. And when social media came about, well, I was writing beforehand, but when social media came about, it was the right tool for me to begin to express myself in a way unfettered, untouched by a lot of journalists who would sometimes manicure my interviews in such a way as to not, where my voice wasn't heard. That's one part of it. I also must take responsibility early on, um, because a lot of times too, like in a lot of my earliest interviews, I would say in my early 20s up until about 1998, I was more or less kind of fitting into a mold of what I thought I should be doing. I was very much, even though I was always against the whole Young Lions thing because I thought it was silly, I was very much a part of that whole Young Lions jazz conservatism, suit and tie, that
Mm-hmm,
whole
mm-hmm,
thing. Even though I was listening to Marvin Gaye and all this stuff, these are not things that I necessarily talked about in my interviews because one, a lot of it didn't come up, and two, I just was repeating what I saw or fitting
mm-hmm,
into a mold I thought I was supposed to fit in.
mm-hmm,
And I remember complaining to uh, my girlfriend at the time, Deanna Williams, um, who's known as a media coach. She's been on like a unsung as a voice, and was one of the uh, culture bearers of Black music for years. She used to have an association called the International Association of African American Music, and they would have
okay,
a whole big conference every year where they would celebrate various artists and so forth.
mm-hmm,
And I wouldn't be surprised if a bit of BAM doesn't come from me seeing her do that kind of celebration
mm-hmm,
of Black music. But she was the one who really, her being a media coach, she was the one who really got me to be more outspoken in interviews. Because I was complaining to her one day, like, why do they always put me in this box? Like,
mm-hmm,
I do interviews and maybe I talk about things like in Frank Zappa or whatever else, and then I get the interview and it's like it looks like everybody else. And she was like, "Yeah, but you play into it, stop."
mm-hmm,
She was like, "Talk to them like you talk to me."
mm-hmm,
And I was like, "You know what? That's it." And that was the beginning of a whole new me in terms of the press and how outspoken I was. And I remember my record Nick at Night had just come out, and this was my first downbeat cover was supposed to happen. And on that interview, I said, I'm going for it. This is the one I'm going to do it. And I was talking about all kinds of stuff, which seemed crazy at the time, which it doesn't seem that crazy now. But at the time, I was talking about clothes and fashion and how that's important. I was talking about uh, sex in relation to music and how that's always been a part of it, the expression of it, the sensuality of music,
mm-hmm,
why women aren't coming out to the shows. One, because a lot of these cats are not dressed well, and women like to see men dressed well, and
mm-hmm,
people in general. It makes the music sexier when the people on the stage look like the $30 you're gonna spend coming into a place. If the people look worse, like in a t-shirt and raggedy jeans and stuff, like they just rolled out of bed, the music is going to be reflective of that. As they say, clothes make the man or the person. So I talked about all these things and all the problems I thought about the music, and more or less trying to bring the sensual sexiness back to the music. And Nick at Night, that's what the music was about for me. That album was about nighttime and when we as artists thrive and staying up to 4 a.m. and
mm-hmm,
hanging out at bars and clubs and all the kind of stuff that goes on, the social aspect of the music too. Because, people go on dates, listening to this music. And unlike a lot of artists, I've never been really precious about my music that people should be silent. The whole jazz quiet policy. I feel like that's detrimental to the music. First of all, it's expensive to hear what we do. So if you go to the Blue Note and you bring a date, you're looking at with the minimum, you pay $50 to get in, you spend $100 to get in. It's another $100 to eat, drink. That's a $200 night. If you can't talk to your date, I mean, somebody would opt to go somewhere where they can talk, you know? So for me, it's just, hey, talk over my music. It's fine. We're having a conversation up here on the bandstand. Y'all have y'all conversation out there. And if somebody's on a date and they hook up as a result of my music, if I could provide the soundtrack to that, and maybe 2 years later they have a family and a baby, whatever, my music is a part of that. I
Right.
feel like I've done my job. That's really why I'm there.
Mm.
I'm there to adjudicate and provide that atmosphere for romance. That's what my music is about. So that piece was really about all of that. And that was just, for whatever reason, too much for them at the time. They took me off the cover, they stripped it, and they put it as a kind of sidebar interview with a bunch of other New Orleans trumpet players. And they called it Sex, Threads, and Jazz. If you can look for it somewhere, people who are interested. But yeah, all my peers thought I was crazy for doing it. But it's like, this is the stuff we talk about in the dressing room every night. But y'all calling me crazy for what? Because I dared talked about it to an interviewer. So, but that was the beginning of me separating myself in terms of my voice from that whole jazz ideology of having to appear a certain way, but it not being authentic to my real self off the bandstand. That was the beginning of me making it myself one person and not splitting myself and pretending to be something. Not pretending to be something I wasn't, because I never did that, but I did opt sometimes to be silent about things in interviews where I should have forced or been more outspoken. And that interview was the beginning of me being more like my full self, I will say.
Right. And like she said, talk to her or talk to the interviewer like you're talking to me. You're having a conversation. And just like now, we're having a conversation. I didn't want these interviews, not interviews, to be just your regular question and answer type thing. It's a conversation. And I want the energy to be welcoming. I want us to be able to, yeah, push the envelope if we need to. We're going to talk about things that maybe people don't really want to hear, but like you, it needs to be done.
Mhm.
So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Likewise.